Good morning. I'd like to start this presentation with acknowledging my co-authors, Cliff Ford, 35 years of experience as a geologist, Alistair Stanley, the rookie with 5 years, and myself, Jim Dirstein, geophysicist, 35 years experience. We're going to talk about the late Triassic prospectivity insights we've gained from the automatic pre-interpretation application of a lot of the open file 3D datasets from the Carnarvon Basin in Western Australia. The image we're showing here is from one of these surfaces, showing an immense amount of structural detail, and that is going to lead into my first of two quotes. Is the truth of a story lies in the detail, because these images, these features help us form a perception of reality, because ultimately we're trying to build a geological model, and that geological model is what we make our decisions on. So if we have a good geological model, you'd like to think we could make better decisions. So this talk is like any other. It's going to address certain components. It's got a where, which this slide clearly shows. We're on the western side of Australia, just north of Exmouth on the Exmouth Plateau, and we're going to be looking at this area in detail. We see the topography and bathymetry illuminated and provided by the Geoscience Australia. But also in this presentation, we're going to talk about why, which is, again, we're trying to build this geological model. How we've done this is, yes, we're using genetic segmentation and gene sequencing to help us get through this vast amount of data. And what we're doing and what we've achieved, we'd like to share with you with several examples. So here's a zoom into the study area, and that bathymetry map doesn't look so cool at this detail, but nevertheless we see a number of gray polygonal outlines, which represents about 100 square kilometers of 3D acquired in the last 20 years. So the geoscientist today is faced with the daunting task of looking at 125 open file 3D datasets from the Northwest Shelf. We've showing outlined here in the yellow is 8 of these larger 3Ds that we'll look at. This represents about 16,000 square kilometers of data. Most of these data sets were acquired by Chevron, one of them by Hess, and also in the map we can see the outlines of the oil fields in green and the outlines of the gas fields in red. This area in here is the greater Gorgon area, and that's Chevron reports about 40 TCF in this area and about 60 years of production life. So the area, again, we're showing this time on the map, we're showing our structural elements and stratigraphic domains. We particularly the facies domains we're looking at for these delta fronts, these inboard, medial, and outboard. These are adapted from the some of the papers presented at Western Australian Basin Symposium in 2013 from Chevron, the Addison et al., and from Woodside, Adamson et al., from Chevron, Payenberg, and another 12 authors. So these studies represent an update of 20 years of analysis on the basin by these two operators, and many man years of effort in going to understanding and developing and exploring and producing the resources on the Northwest Shelf. This schematic chronostratigraphic diagram is modified after Adamson, and what we're looking at here is we're seeing an inboard coastal area, and we're going about 500 meters off, 500 kilometers offshore, medial and outboard. The outboard area is dominated by siltstones and claystones. We have delta front shore facies in green, which are the siltstone claystones, and then in yellow here we're highlighting some of the more delta front shore face sand prone areas. We're looking at a number of significant events, two of which are the maximum flooding surface, the H. Balmy in the deeper part of the Mungaroo, and also we see flooding surface at the base of the Brigadier Formation, near the top of the Mungaroo. Highlighted on here are the 3D data sets we look at, and we have a series of examples from different portions in this chronostratigraphic cartoon. Now, I won't be able to get through all 9 examples, but we will get through a good portion. Now, since our objective is to help understand a geological model, well, understanding that geological model means looking at an enormous amount of data. We don't have time. We don't have, and we can't do this as human beings consistently. So the method we're applying here is a genetic segmentation, gene sequencing algorithm or process or technique that has been inspired by the Human Genome Project. So we have a 3D volume here, but don't think of it as a bunch of 3D traces. Let's think of it as a bunch of chromosomes. And rather than waveforms, we've got genes. So what we're doing is we're going through and we're trying to group these waveforms into populations based on their spatial and genetic compatibility. Now, this process happens for thousands and thousands of generations simultaneously, globally through the entire volume. And after each generation, the common waveform evolves as well. And here in this lower panel in highlighted D, we can see that this is kind of like a snapshot in time. Some of these populations evolve very quickly because there's a high degree of genetic similarity. Some of them evolve very slowly. Some of them won't evolve into significant populations at all. But at the end of the process, we're left with geopopulations that more or less describe virtually every peak and trough surface in the volume. Now, are we going to use every peak and trough surface? Well, I don't think so. But what we do need in developing our models is we need to capture the variability and include that into the geological model. Now, in some cases, we may not need a lot of surfaces, but in many cases, we certainly need more than what we're using currently. So our first example, we're going to go to the Wheatstone gas field and the Wheatstone 3D. And most of these examples we're going to show, these discoveries are located on footwalls of tilted fault blocks. They're certainly structurally oriented and amplitude supported. So here we have the inter-Jurassic unconformity being shown here on or IJU being shown here on this two-way time map. We see an outline of the Wheatstone field. We see an outline of the Ago field. We see an arbitrary line going up northeast, southwest. In the middle, we see a fitness map, which shows the genetic variability of the waveforms within that population. And we also show a whole bunch of geopopulations that exist in terms of the below the IJU. Now we're going to use those and I'll describe that in the following slides. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about fitness. Here we see a high degree of variability and we're below an unconformity. We'd expect that. Or we're at an unconformity below which we see a lot of waveform variability, so we'd expect that. But fitness, this is a population. This is from the Shandong dataset. It's at the reservoir level. And what we can see is these areas of green here represent the highest genetic similarity between that trace and the common waveform of the genotype. So where it's green, we see a high degree of genetic similarity. So we're like siblings. Where it's red and blue, it doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's like a first or second cousin. So what does this mean from a reflectivity point of view? Well, there's changes happening, and those changes could be associated with pore fluid, they could be associated with thickness, they could be associated with lithology, they could be associated with changes in boundary conditions. The point is the anomaly is there, automatically detected for us, but we need to determine what it means and what its significance is. Now, looking at back to Wheatstone, and the upper panel shows a seismic data set, we have three groups of surfaces sitting below that IJU unconformity. Group 1 consists of red surfaces that highlight the short surfaces, short or smaller populations that terminate at 2390 milliseconds. We have group 2 consists of gray surfaces here, and they seem to trundle right through this 2390 millisecond line. Group 3 are below the 2390 millisecond line, with very few of them extending above. So this 2390 milliseconds, no surprise, is a gas-water contact. Now, this is something that isn't mappable on an event, but what we can see is that the reflector, the waveform, is changing in response to pore fluid. So where we get pore gas saturation, we're seeing the waveform is changing, and it's no longer compatible genetically with the populations that don't have the pore fluid. And what we can see is the shale units or claystone units that are running between, well, the waveform's not really affected by the pore fluid. The lower panel shows the whole scene without the seismic data. So here we can take a little more detailed. The reflector geometry or surface geometry is more apparent, and we start to see areas where some of these surfaces didn't develop, and that raises a whole additional range. Let's move to Geryon on the Dufkin 3D. So the Geryon here, we've got a line on the shown here on the near top Mangaroo map, or this TR30 zone, and we see this little horse block in here through Maynard. We can see we go next to Orpheus, and we also come up onto the Geryon structure. We've got two-way time. We've got a co-rendered fitness and amplitude, which are both highlighting the gas charge over these structures. It may be structurally conformable, though I'm not too sure what all this means out through here. And what we've got also is subwaveform fitness. Now I'm going to talk in another example about the subwaveform fitness, so I'm going to skip that on this. Now if we look at the waveform fitness through here, we see a feature that could be interpreted as a stratigraphic feature. And when we look at the seismic section, we look at the ribbon through this line showing the variability. We can see this point here corresponds with that point there. So this is where the horizontal flat spot is coming over and intersecting with the waveform associated with that population. So what we're getting is we're getting a waveform change, and we're able to see that edge of that flat spot from this fitness map. The reported field outline is out here, and we can see that is a little bit harder to see on the from the fitness results. So let's move over to Shandon. Shandon's a chevron data set. The Shandon wells were drilled in about 1,200 meters of water. So let's kind of review the process that we would go through. So we've had a seismically processed data set. It may be an open file data set. It may be your most recent reprocessing, but we've calculated the spatial database. We have all the surfaces after the pre-interpretation processing. Now we're going in here, and our task for the moment is Brigadier Mangaroo. So we query the data, and we found about 300 surfaces that match our query. So we go through here and we start looking at these populations, and we see that the surface is very complex structurally. We can see the footwall traps of Yellow Glen and Shandon. I don't know if you'll see it, but you've also got outgassing features or pop marks, even down at the reservoir level, but structurally it's complex. Now, there isn't enough spatial compatibility across a fault from its footwall to hanging wall for the seismetics processing to include that into a geopopulation. So what it's done is it's found a way through tip points to continue this surface across the faults, or more accurately around the faults. But in some cases, some of these faults are too extensive, and so you end up with population here, population there, etc. And that's exactly what's happening. We'll show you here that this near top Mangaroo formation surface that we want consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 surfaces. So we merge them. But what we like is the fact that this doesn't change the original database. This is separate. There's a history file that shows that user so-and-so brought together all this information, and he decided this was a surface. So the next person or the next time you go back for a task, you're looking at this pristine, consistent, unbiased database to mine for additional information. All right, let's keep moving. We're going out to the Glencoe 3D dataset. We're going to do two examples from here. One's the Top Mungaroo. And well, this covers most of the survey, and we can see northeast, southwest trending structures. We can see lots of tilted fault blocks, and we can see certainly Hess has targeted many of these. We also have the fitness. Well, and the fitness, the waveform, the common genotype associated with this surface it can be shown down here. But this is a maximum flooding surface, and we've got very different depositional regimes above and below this two-way time surface. We have more carbonate influence in the Bonaventure out here, and in the Brigadier out here, and what we're expecting is more channelized. So we're seeing something like this, and we might immediately presume that we've got a channel, a nice big channel going down here. But let's investigate this a little further. So we're going to target portions of the waveform and recalculate the fitness. And by targeting the lower portion of the waveform here, we start to see all these channels that we were expecting depositionally from the model. And perhaps some of these features up here are more influenced by what's going on depositionally in the Brigadier Formation. And finally, we have the amplitude down here. We can see this is the instantaneous amplitude at the pick. And we can see that there's some high amplitudes through here that may be representative of lower saturations of gas, or maybe representative of variability in the carbonates. But you can see it is similar, but it's also different to the fitness. Let's move down in the section to near the maximum flooding surface H balmy down through in here. And we're going to look again at the Glencoe. And what we can see on the two-way time and amplitude, certainly on the amplitude, we see different channel patterns within this area of entrenchment. And we have also channels happening, but slightly different geometries. And looking at a cross line north-south through this area, we can highlight this in incised valley fill, and we also show a cartoon of the expectations of what we might see in this type of depositional environment. Now we move over to the 4,500 square kilometer chevron data set and look deeper into the section. I'm going to show a little bit, the line we're going to show goes through the Thebe location, and what we can see is tilted fault blocks. And what you may be able to see is there's a flat spot, or well, it doesn't look flat, but it's basically the gas-water contact or gas contact through this section in the red ellipse. Now over here in the yellow ellipse, we identify a feature on this surface, this particular surface is showing a high degree of differential compaction. It also is quite significant in size, and it has amplitude support. And we also see high fitness associated with the channel form. I'm sure Chevron's aware of this, and I expect they'll be drilling this location at some stage. So in summary, we've done kind of a whirlwind tour around some of these. I haven't talked about Endract or Clio or some of these other features, but we can do that another time. There'll be much more extensive presentation and documentation, a peer-reviewed paper coming out in APIA later this year. But to summarize and conclude, the pre-interpretation processing technique delivers a spatial database of automatically extracted surfaces that allows in-depth analysis of any portion of the seismic data. This is really important when we're building this geological model. It allows us to decide what's important based on a review of much more of the data than we could possibly do with traditional interpretation techniques. The examples presented here access a consistent database, enable an efficient and effective review of large area, and it was done by a very small team. This provided us validation and corroboration with the proposed Triassic models. And we've also identified a number of funny looking things that probably need to be considered in future models of the area, both at regional and prospect scale detail. We've highlighted changes and variability in the reservoir, seals, pore fluids within the Brigadier Mungaroo Formation across known location, providing us insights into the historical results. But more importantly, it helps us learn, and that's the foundation of our knowledge base, so that we can look at and compare untested prospectivity, and also keep an eye on what activity and what new discoveries are being made quickly. The pre-interpretation databases are created without any interpreter bias. We like that because this is something that means there's corporate compliance over a huge area, many 3Ds, and it becomes a easily accessible, valuable team asset for data and prospectivity review and planning. While pre-interpretation processing is certainly much faster, more consistent, and more unbiased than traditional surface extraction techniques, we still have to decide on the significance of the results. This is something that everybody here in this room has a different background and has different insights. Now, it's important we have corporate compliance in terms of the way we extract the information, but we should actually encourage the diversity that we see in this room of opinions to help us with our model, develop our model. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge Nabil Lachiri. He's the seismetics inventor and patent holder, and for allowing us to process more than 150 OpenFile 3D seismic data volumes. Co-authors have already acknowledged Australian government, the OpenFile policy for G&G data is really, really a very good policy. Woodside and Chevron for continuing to share, and most recently at the Western Australian Basin 2013, their exploration insights and depositional framework for this highly prolific resource located on the Northwest Shelf. And their exploration teams, past and present, because this has been hard work by a lot of people over many decades. Finally, CPEX, thank you for letting us present this technical material. The final quote: "The devil is in the details," which you've heard before, but so is salvation. Here is some images from the Glencoe dataset without the seismic. We can see intrusives, we can see injectites, we can see progrades, we can see areas where we have a lack of geopopulations. These all encourage us to ask questions, or metaphorically slap us in the face, saying what's going on here. Thank you.